My name is Emily Walker. I'm 34 years old. And I learned something painful the night my boyfriend called me dead weight. Not because the words themselves were clever, not because they were true, but because they revealed a truth that had been hiding inside our relationship for nearly a year. Sometimes a relationship doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it dies slowly. A joke here, a comparison there, a silence where a defense should have been, and by the time the final blow lands, all that's left is deciding whether you're willing to keep pretending it's alive. Ryan Mitchell and I met at a networking event 2 years earlier. At first, we seemed like an unlikely match. He was 31, ambitious, polished, and climbing the corporate ladder in sales. I was a freelance graphic designer and creative consultant whose income came in waves. Some months I made more money than most people expected. Other months were slower. That uncertainty didn't scare me anymore. I'd built a career from nothing. I loved the freedom. I loved the creativity. Most importantly, I loved knowing every success belonged to me. Ryan seemed fascinated by that independence. When we first met, back then, he'd ask questions about my clients, my projects, my process. He'd listen for hours while I talked about branding strategies or design concepts, and when I landed a major contract 6 months into our relationship, he surprised me with dinner and champagne. For a while, I believed he genuinely admired what I had built. Looking back now, I think he admired it only as long as nobody challenged it. The first year felt easy. Weekend trips, late-night conversations, new restaurants, movie marathons, the ordinary things that slowly become the foundation of a life together. The only complication was Ryan's friend group. They were always around. Corporate professionals, competitive, opinionated, the kind of people who turned every dinner into an unspoken contest. Who got promoted? Who bought a bigger house? Who took the most expensive vacation? Who had the most impressive title? At first, I didn't mind. They were loud but harmless. Or at least I thought they were. Then little comments started appearing. Tiny things, easy to dismiss. Dumb. Emily, I must be nice deciding when you work. I wish I could spend all day in sweatpants. So what happens when clients stop calling? Always followed by laughter. Always delivered with a smile. Always subtle enough to deny. Ryan usually laughed too. Not maliciously. Not at first. Just enough to fit in. I told myself it wasn't important. But the comments kept coming. And they became sharper. One night at dinner, one of the women leaned forward and asked, "So what's your long-term plan?" I frowned. For what? Your career? She smiled politely. Freelancing forever seems risky. The table grew quiet. Everyone watching, waiting. I explained my business model, my client roster, my income averages, my growth plans. She nodded, then said, "Interesting." The way she said it made it sound like she'd already decided none of it mattered. Ryan changed the subject. He didn't defend me, didn't challenge her, didn't say a word. That bothered me more than the question itself. Months passed. The pattern repeated. Again and again. I became the unofficial project. Everyone analyzed. The creative girl, the freelancer, the unconventional partner. And slowly, Ryan stopped looking at me the way he used to. Sometimes I'd catch him watching the husbands and boyfriends of his friends. Lawyers, executives, managers, men with predictable careers and impressive titles. Then he'd glance at me, and something would flicker behind his eyes. Something I couldn't quite identify. At the time, I called it stress. Now I know it was comparison. Around 6 months before everything ended, the atmosphere changed completely. One friend in particular became relentless. Her name was Victoria. Every gathering included a new jab, a new criticism, A new reason why I supposedly wasn't enough. Ryan never joined in directly, but he stopped stopping it. And somehow that hurt even more. Because silence can sound exactly like agreement. The emotional distance grew gradually. Ryan stayed out later, spent more time with his friends, came home, exhausted, distracted, absent. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he'd say no. Whenever I asked if we were okay, he'd say yes. But I could feel something slipping away, like sand through my fingers. Then came the birthday party. The night everything finally surfaced, Ryan got home around 1 a.m. I was sitting at the dining table finishing work for a client with a tight deadline. He looked tired, slightly drunk, emotionally wound tight. The second he walked through the door, I knew something was coming. He sat heavily on the couch, ran a hand through his hair, then said the words that changed everything. "Emily, we need to talk." I saved my project, closed my laptop, and turned toward him. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, quieter, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. "Okay," I said carefully. "What's going on?" Ryan stared at the floor for several seconds. Then he looked up. "My friends think you're dead weight." For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The sentence was so absurd that my brain refused to process it. "I'm sorry," he swallowed. "They think you're holding me back." The room seemed to tilt. I sat completely still. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I knew if I reacted immediately, I'd say something I'd regret. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Is that what they think?" Ryan hesitated. Then came the answer that hurt far more than the insult. "They have a point." Something cold settled inside my chest. Not anger, not yet, just clarity. "What exactly is their point?" Ryan exhaled heavily. "They think I carry most of the relationship." I stared at him. In what universe? I'm the one with a stable career. I laughed once. A humorless sound. Stable career. Emily, no. Seriously. Stable career. I've paid half our expenses for 2 years. You know, that's not what I mean. What do you mean then? Ryan looked frustrated. Like he was trying to explain something obvious to someone slow. My career has direction. The sentence landed harder than the deadweight comment. Because it wasn't his friends talking anymore. It was him. You think my career doesn't... I'm saying, you don't have the same ambition. There it was. The real issue. The thing that had been hiding behind every joke, every comment, every awkward silence. I sat back slowly, suddenly exhausted. Do you really believe that? Ryan rubbed his temples. I think you're talented. The word think irritated me. Not know. Think. I think you're smart. Another think. I think you do good work. Think. But... His eyes met mine. But you're comfortable. I blinked. Comfortable. You don't constantly push for more. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I built a business from scratch. You know what I mean? No. Ryan, explain it to me. He stood and started pacing. My friends see it. There they are. What? Your friends. I pointed toward the door. The invisible people sitting in this room having our conversation. His jaw tightened. You're twisting this. Am I? Yes. Then tell me something that didn't come from them. Silence. A long one. The kind that answers everything. Finally, he said quietly. They helped me see things differently. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was tragic. There it was. The confession. Months of influence. Months of poison. Months of comparisons. And now he was standing in front of me repeating their opinions, as if they were his own discoveries. I suddenly remembered every dinner, every gathering, every joke, every moment he'd chosen silence. All the puzzle pieces snapped together. How long? He frowned. What? How long have you felt this way? Ryan didn't answer immediately, which told me enough. A few months? A few months. Translation. At least 6. Maybe longer. I nodded, slowly. The hurt inside me transformed into something else. Acceptance. The kind that comes when a truth becomes impossible to deny. Ryan noticed the change instantly. His expression shifted. Almost nervous. Emily. I stood. Walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water. Took a slow sip, then turned back toward him. If I'm dead weight. He looked relieved. Like he thought we were finally reaching the negotiation phase, the part where I defended myself, the part where I begged him to reconsider, the part where he got to decide whether I was worthy enough to stay. Instead, I said, "Then don't carry me." His face froze. What? Problem solved. That's not what I meant. It sounds exactly like what you meant. No. You think I'm holding you back? I set the glass down. You think I don't match your energy. Emily, you think your friends see things more clearly than you do. His eyes widened. That's not fair. I laughed. That same empty laugh. Fair. The irony almost made me dizzy. For 6 months, I'd been evaluated by people who barely knew me. Compared against strangers. Measured against standards I never agreed to. And now he wanted fairness. I've spent months being judged by your friends. They were trying to help. Help. I stared at him. They called me dead weight. They didn't mean stop. My voice was calm, far calmer than I felt. Stop defending them. Ryan went quiet. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. Because the Ryan the first fell in love with never would have allowed this. The Ryan the first fell in love with respected me. This version needed other people's permission to value the woman he claimed to love. And suddenly, I understood something. You can't compete with a crowd, especially when the person you're competing for keeps inviting them into the relationship. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Behind me, Ryan followed. Where are you going? I pulled a suitcase from the closet, started folding clothes. His voice rose. Emily. I zipped open a drawer, grabbed chargers, toiletries, my laptop, the essentials. What are you doing? Packing. His face drained of color. You're leaving. Tonight? Over one conversation. I stopped, turned around, met his eyes. This wasn't one conversation. The words hung heavily between us, because we both knew it was true. This was 6 months. He opened his mouth, closed it. No defense, no argument, nothing. I continued packing. Every joke. Fold. Every comment. Fold. Every time someone disrespected me and you laughed. Fold. Every time you chose their opinion over your own experience. Ryan's eyes filled with panic. Emily. Wait. No. Let's talk about this. We are talking about it. No. Let's fix it. Fix it. The word almost broke my heart, because he still didn't understand. This wasn't broken tonight. Tonight was simply when I finally saw the damage. I don't think you can fix this. His face crumpled. Please. For a brief moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. Scared, human, vulnerable. And that made it harder, not easier. Because if he'd been cruel, walking away would have been simple. Instead, he was someone who had slowly lost himself. Someone who had chosen approval over love. Someone who probably didn't even realize how far he'd drifted until now. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed he was sorry. I believed he regretted it. I even believed he loved me. But none of that changed what had happened. Love without respect eventually becomes resentment. And respect had disappeared long ago. I finished packing, pulled the suitcase upright. Ryan stood in the doorway. Looking lost? Where will you go? A hotel. For how long? Long enough. His eyes glistened. We can work through this. I picked up my laptop bag. Maybe once? We could have. Before the comparisons. Before the judgment. Before he let strangers rewrite his view of me. But not anymore. I walked toward the front door. Ryan followed closely behind. His voice cracked. You're seriously leaving? I opened the door, then looked back one final time. Tell your friends they won. And then I left. The elevator doors closed. The apartment disappeared. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. I didn't sleep much that night. The hotel room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that forces you to sit alone with your thoughts. I lay awake staring at the ceiling until nearly sunrise, replaying every second of the conversation, every word, every expression, every warning sign I'd ignored. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted. 2 years is a long time to throw away. People say stupid things when they're upset. People make mistakes. Relationships survive worse. But every time I started questioning myself, I remembered one detail. Ryan hadn't simply insulted me. He had agreed with them. That was the difference. The problem wasn't the words. The problem was the belief behind them. By morning, my decision felt solid. Painful, but solid. If someone tells you who they are, eventually, you have to listen. 3 days later, I found a furnished studio apartment downtown. Small, expensive, not particularly charming, but it was mine. A temporary place to land, while I figured out what came next. I moved most of my belongings while Ryan was at work. The process felt surreal. 2 years reduced to boxes. Clothes, books, electronics, fragments of a shared life. On my final trip, I left my key on the kitchen counter. Then I sent one simple text. I'm finished moving out. Less than 10 seconds later, my phone rang. Ryan. I stared at the screen, then answered, Hello. His relief was immediate. Thank God. I closed my eyes. Ryan. Can we please talk face to face? I'm not sure there's anything left to say. There is. His voice sounded exhausted. Like he hadn't slept either. I was drunk. There it was. The explanation. The justification. The thing he'd probably rehearsed dozens of times. I was frustrated. Silence. I was stressed. More silence. Finally, I asked. Which part? What? Which part was the alcohol? Ryan hesitated. The conversation. No. I sat on the edge of my new bed. The dead weight comment. That. The ambition, come on. Silence. The part where your friends think I'm not good enough. More silence. The part where you agreed with them. His breathing became heavier. Emily. No. My voice remained calm. Answer the question. A long pause followed. Then he whispered, I don't know. Finally, honesty. Raw and uncomfortable. The truth he'd been avoiding. I nodded to myself. Exactly. Please don't do this. Do what? Make it sound worse than it was. I almost laughed. Worse than it was? That's not what I mean. No. I stood and walked toward the window. Cars moved below, like tiny streams of light. The city kept going, completely indifferent to heartbreak. This didn't happen because you were drunk. His silence confirmed it. This happened because for months, you let people tell you what I was worth. I know. And eventually, you started believing them. I know. The second I know sounded broken, but it didn't change anything. Ryan exhaled shakily. I'm sorry. I looked out at the skyline. So on why? That conversation lasted another 20 minutes. Mostly apologies, mostly regret, mostly promises. By the end, I knew 2 things. Ryan genuinely regretted what happened. And genuine regret wasn't enough. When the call ended, I cried for the first time. Not because I wanted him back, because I finally accepted that I couldn't have him back. Not the version I'd loved. That version was gone. Over the next week, Ryan sent messages constantly. Long paragraphs, voice notes, emails. Every one of them said the same thing. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please let me fix this. I read every message. I answered none. Then something unexpected happened. A week after I moved out, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. I frowned. Who is this? The response came immediately. Victoria. My stomach tightened. Ryan's friend. The unofficial leader of the group. The woman responsible for many of the comments. For several seconds, I considered blocking the number. Instead, curiosity won. I called. She answered on the first ring. Emily. That's me. The voice that greeted me sounded completely different from the confident woman I remembered. No arrogance. No superiority. Just nervousness. What do you want? Victoria took a breath. I owe you an apology. I said nothing. She continued. Actually, I owe you several. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. For a few moments, she seemed unsure where to begin. Then she said something I never expected. After you left that night, Ryan came back to the party. That caught my attention. He did, yeah. Her voice grew quieter. He was devastated. I frowned. Devastated wasn't the word I'd expected. Embarrassed, maybe. Angry. Frustrated. Not devastated. Victoria continued. He told everyone what happened. I remained silent. We thought it would blow over. A bitter smile touched my lips. Of course they did. People like them always assumed consequences were temporary. We told him you'd calm down. She paused. We told him you'd come back. What changed? The line became quiet. Then Victoria said, Melissa. I immediately knew who she meant. The woman who had been even worse than Victoria. The one who treated every gathering like an audition for social status. What about her? Victoria Sahil. She said something. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. What? Another pause. Then Victoria repeated the sentence. She said, Now you can finally date someone worthy of you. I closed my eyes. There it was. The real opinion. Not hidden behind jokes. Not disguised as concern. Pure judgment. Pure arrogance. Victoria continued. Everyone laughed. I wasn't surprised. Then her voice changed. But Ryan didn't. My eyes opened. What happened? He froze. The words came slowly, carefully, like she was reliving the moment. He just sat there staring at her. A chill ran through me. Then Melissa repeated it. I said nothing. She started talking about how, now, he could find someone more successful. Victoria swallowed. Someone more ambitious. Another pause. Someone on his level. I could almost see the scene. The crowded room. The drinks. The smug smiles. The certainty. Then, Victoria whispered. And that's when Ryan looked at her and said something I'll never forget. I found myself holding my breath. What did he say? The answer came softly. So that's what you've all been trying to do. I blinked. Victoria continued. Nobody understood what he meant. Her voice trembled slightly. Then Ryan stood up. Another pause, and he said, My chest tightened. I just lost someone I love because I listened to you. The words hit harder than I expected. Harder than they should have. Because suddenly I could see it. The exact moment everything became real for him. The exact moment the fog lifted. The exact moment he realized the people he'd trusted had never been trying to protect him. They'd been trying to reshape his life into something they approved of. Victoria let the silence linger. Then, she quietly added, The room went completely silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I sat frozen in my apartment chair, staring at nothing. Victoria finally broke the silence. Ryan left right after that. I swallowed. What happened then? I followed him outside. Her voice sounded distant now, like she was replaying the memory. He was standing in the parking lot. Another pause. Crying. That image hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted him back, but because I knew Ryan, for all his flaws. He wasn't someone who cried easily. Something inside him must have completely shattered. Victoria continued. He kept saying the same thing. I waited. I knew better. A lump formed in my throat. I knew better, and I still listened. The sadness in her voice sounded genuine. He blamed himself. As he should, but strangely, hearing it didn't feel satisfying. It just felt sad, because nobody wins when a relationship dies this way. Victoria exhaled. The truth is, Emily, we spent months influencing him. There it was, the confession, the thing I'd suspected all along. We judged you. Her voice shook. We judged your career. We judged your lifestyle. We judged the fact that you weren't trying to climb some corporate ladder. I stared out the window. Traffic flowed beneath the city lights. Life continuing as usual. While old wounds reopened, we kept telling him he could do better. Victoria's voice dropped lower, and eventually he started seeing you through our eyes instead of his own. I closed my eyes, because that sentence perfectly explained everything, not through his own eyes, through theirs. That was exactly what had happened. Victoria Sahil, we were wrong. I said nothing. We confused ambition with appearances. Another pause. We thought success only looked one way. I couldn't disagree. That was exactly how they behaved. People who measured worth using job titles, office promotions, status, external validation, things that looked impressive from a distance, never stopping to ask whether they actually made someone happy. I looked up your work after the breakup. That surprised me. You did? Yeah. She laughed weakly, and honestly, I felt stupid. I frowned. What do you mean? Your client list is incredible. A small smile touched my lips. Victoria continued. You've built something most of us couldn't. I didn't respond, because praise from someone who once dismissed me felt strange. Not unpleasant, just strange. I'm sorry. Emily. This time I believed her. Not because the apology erased anything, because it sounded real. For a moment I considered saying something harsh, something angry, something that reflected all the frustration I'd carried for months. Instead, I simply said, "Thank you." The call ended shortly afterward. When I hung up, I sat alone for nearly an hour, thinking, processing, trying to understand what I felt. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt relieved, but mostly, I felt sad, because Ryan had allowed people who barely understood our relationship to help destroy it, and by the time he realized it, it was already too late. The following weeks became some of the most productive of my career. Without realizing it, I'd spent months carrying invisible weight. The constant comparisons, the subtle criticisms, the feeling that I had to justify my choices, defend my career, prove my worth. Once all of that disappeared, something unexpected happened. I had energy again, focus, confidence. Within a month, I landed 2 major contracts. One of them alone was worth more than 3 months of my average income. Another evolved into a long-term consulting partnership. For the first time in years, I stopped questioning myself, and when that happened, opportunities seemed to appear everywhere. Ryan continued reaching out. Texts, emails, phone calls. I didn't respond, not because I hated him, because I knew any conversation would only reopen wounds. Then, about a month after the breakup, life played one final trick on us. I was invited to speak on a panel at a respected design conference. My mentor practically forced me to accept. "Stop hiding," she told me. "People need to hear your story." So I agreed. The event went well, better than I expected. The audience was engaged. Several companies expressed interest in future projects, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of everything I'd built. After the panel ended, I spent time networking, exchanging business cards, talking to potential clients. Then, I looked across the room and saw Ryan. My stomach dropped. He was standing near one of the vendor displays. His company had sponsored part of the event. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other, neither moving, neither speaking. Then he started walking toward me. I considered leaving. Instead, I stayed. When he finally reached me, he stopped a few feet away. "Hi." His voice sounded cautious, almost nervous. "Hi." An awkward silence followed. He looked thinner, more tired, like the last month had been difficult. "You were amazing up there." I nodded. "Thank you." Another silence. Then he asked, "How have you been?" "Buzu." A small smile touched my face. "Good, busy." His eyes softened. "I'm glad." And somehow that sounded genuine. Not jealous. Not defensive. Just glad. For several moments neither of us knew what to say. Finally, Ryan spoke. "Could we get coffee?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to leave. But another part needed closure. Needed answers. Needed to see whether the man I loved still existed somewhere beneath all the mistakes. "Okay." The relief on his face was immediate. We crossed the street and entered a quiet cafe. The kind of place where people whispered. The kind of place where difficult conversations felt unavoidable. We sat across from each other in a corner booth. Ryan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, as if drawing strength from the warmth. Then he looked at me and said the words he'd probably rehearsed 100 times. "I'm sorry." I held his gaze. He continued. "I was wrong." The sincerity was unmistakable, about everything. Silence. Then he added quietly, "I let other people tell me who you were." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just recognition. Because for the first time, he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming alcohol, or stress, or confusion. He was accepting responsibility. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing a person can do. Ryan looked down briefly, then back up. "I stopped seeing you." I frowned. "What?" "I stopped seeing the woman I actually loved." His voice cracked slightly, and started seeing the version my friends described. The honesty hurt, because it was true. He exhaled shakily. I lost perspective. I remained quiet. Ryan continued. "Every joke." His eyes lowered. "Every comparison." Another pause. "Every comment they made." His jaw tightened. "I should have defended you." For the first time since we'd sat down, I felt my anger weaken. Not disappear, just soften. Because he finally understood. Not the breakup, not the consequences, the betrayal itself, the thing that hurt most. Being abandoned while standing right beside the person who was supposed to stand with me. I took a slow sip of coffee, then asked the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why?" Ryan blinked. "Why? What? Why did their opinions matter more than your own experience?" The question seemed to hit him hard. He looked away, thinking, searching. Finally, he answered, "I don't know." A sad smile touched his lips. At least I didn't then. He shook his head. "I think I spent so much time trying to be successful that I started trusting people who looked successful." I listened, and somewhere along the way, He swallowed. I stopped trusting myself. The answer felt painfully honest, painfully human, and for the first time since the breakup, I truly understood him. Not because I agreed, because I finally saw the insecurity underneath everything. The fear, the need for approval, the dependence on external validation. It didn't excuse what happened, but it explained it. We talked for another hour. About mistakes, about influence, about respect, about everything we'd lost. By the end, both of us knew the same truth. The relationship was over. Not because we didn't love each other, because too much damage had been done. Some things can heal, some things can't. Eventually, we stood, the conversation exhausted but strangely peaceful. Ryan looked at me one final time. I hope you're happy. I smiled softly. I think I'm getting there. For the first time since the breakup. He smiled too. A real smile. Small, bittersweet. Then we walked out of the cafe, in opposite directions, both carrying the same lesson. Love survives many things. But once respect disappears, sometimes love isn't enough. 3 months passed after that conversation, and surprisingly, it became the closure I didn't know I needed. Ryan and I never spoke again. Not because we hated each other, not because there was unresolved anger. There simply wasn't anything left to say. The relationship had reached its natural ending, painfully, messily. But honestly, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Ryan had started therapy. Apparently, he was trying to understand why he relied so heavily on other people's opinions, why he needed approval, why he had allowed a group of friends to become the voice inside his head. When I heard that, I felt something unexpected, relief. Not because he was suffering, because he was finally doing the work, the kind of work he should have done years earlier, the kind of work that might prevent him from making the same mistake again. As for me, life kept moving forward. My business continued growing. New contracts, new clients, new opportunities. The confidence I'd lost during the final year of my relationship slowly returned. One project led to another, then another, then another. Soon I found myself turning work down, a luxury I'd never had before. 6 months after leaving Ryan's apartment, I hired an assistant. 3 months later, she became a full-time business partner. Together we began discussing office space, expansion, long-term goals. Ironically, I had become more ambitious than ever. Not because someone demanded it, because I finally had room to grow, without constantly defending myself. Around that same time, I began dating again. Nothing serious at first. Coffee dates, dinner conversations, a few awkward experiences, a few funny stories. Then one evening, I attended a gallery opening downtown. I almost didn't go. I was tired, overworked, ready to spend the evening in sweatpants. But a client had invited me, so I showed up. And that's where I met Daniel Brooks, a photographer, creative, calm, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. We started talking about a photography exhibit, then design, then business, then freelancing. 3 hours disappeared, without either of us noticing. When the gallery closed, neither of us wanted the conversation to end. So we grabbed coffee, then dinner the following week, then another dinner, and another. It happened naturally, without pressure, without games, without comparison. One night, about 2 months into dating, we sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights. Daniel asked a question that caught me off guard. What was your last relationship like? I laughed softly. Complicated. He smiled. The worst ones usually are. For a few minutes, I told him the story. Not every detail, just enough. The comments, the comparisons, the deadweight conversation, the breakup. Daniel listened quietly. When I finished, He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. What? His answer was simple. They were idiots. I laughed. A real laugh this time. The kind that comes easily. Not the bitter kind I'd become accustomed to. Daniel shrugged. I'm serious. I smiled. You don't even know them. I don't need to. He leaned back in his chair. Anyone who can't see what you've built is blind. The comment hit me harder than he intended, because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. It was sincere. And sincerity carries a different kind of weight. A few weeks later, Daniel met my friends. The evening went well. Everyone got along immediately. Afterward, one of my closest friends pulled me aside. Can I tell you something? Sure. She smiled. Daniel really likes you. I laughed. I hope so. No. She shook her head. You don't understand. I frowned. What do you mean? Her smile widened. He lights up when he talks about your work. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, because suddenly, a memory surfaced. Ryan introducing me to people. Ryan explaining my career. Ryan describing my business. There had always been an undertone, a subtle apology, a subtle discomfort, a need to justify my unconventional choices. Daniel never did that. When he talked about my work, he sounded proud, excited, inspired. The difference was impossible to ignore, and once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. That realization stayed with me for weeks, not because I wanted to compare the two men, because it revealed something I'd been missing all along. The right person doesn't merely tolerate your path, they celebrate it. 9 months after the breakup, I received an email from Ryan. The subject line read, "No response needed." For several minutes, I debated opening it. Eventually, curiosity won. The message was long, thoughtful, painfully honest. He explained what therapy had uncovered, how much of his identity had been tied to external validation, how he'd spent years seeking approval from friends, coworkers, managers, anyone whose opinion felt important. He admitted he'd never developed a strong sense of self, never learned how to trust his own judgment, and because of that, he'd trusted everyone else's, even when they were wrong, especially when they were wrong. Near the end of the email, one paragraph stood out. I read it 3 times. You were right the night you left. I kept saying I wanted someone who matched my energy, but I defined energy as ambition that looked like mine, success that looked like mine, drive that looked like mine. I couldn't see that you already had all those things. You matched me better than anyone else ever has. I was simply too influenced by people who didn't matter to realize it. I sat quietly for a long time after reading that, not angry, not emotional, just thoughtful, because he finally understood. Unfortunately, understanding arrived too late. I never replied. Just as he'd requested, some apologies don't require a response, only acknowledgement. A year after the breakup, life looked completely different. Daniel and I had moved in together. My business was thriving. The office space had become reality. For the first time in years, I felt completely comfortable in my own skin. No defending, no explaining, no proving, just living. One afternoon, I attended another professional networking event downtown. The kind of event where everyone wore name tags and exchanged business cards. Halfway through the evening, I spotted Ryan across the room. The first time we'd seen each other since the coffee meeting months earlier. He noticed me at nearly the same moment. For a second, time seemed to pause. Then something unexpected happened. Neither of us felt uncomfortable. Neither of us looked away. Ryan simply smiled. A small, polite smile. I smiled back. Then we both continued our conversations. That was it. No dramatic reunion. No emotional speech. No lingering tension. just two people acknowledging each other's existence and moving on. Honestly, it felt perfect. Because some stories don't need a final chapter, only a final sentence. Looking back now, I realize the relationship had been dying long before Ryan called me dead weight. It died every time he laughed instead of defending me. Every time he compared me to someone else. Every time he let another person's opinion matter more than his own experience. The deadweight comment wasn't the cause. It was the revelation. The moment silence finally became words. The moment hidden disrespect became impossible to ignore. I learned something valuable from all of it. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was self-respect. Ryan wanted someone who matched his energy. I wanted someone who respected mine. Now, a year later, we both have what we were looking for. Just not with each other. And honestly, that's exactly how it was supposed to end.